His story starts before me. It starts with a woman named Dr. Yumi Hashimoto, who in 2084 stood in front of a packed auditorium in Kyoto and said something that made half the scientific establishment laugh at her. She said, "We've been sending the wrong kind of message." The Voyager probes had gone out generations before. The SETI arrays had been listening for decades. Humanity had been shouting into the cosmic dark with radio waves and light-speed transmissions, broadcasting our existence like a child pressing their face against a window, fogging it up with breath, hoping someone on the other side would notice. Nobody noticed, or at least nobody answered. Dr. Hashimoto's argument was different. She said radio waves were too passive, too distant. She said that if we wanted contact, real contact, we needed to put something physical out there, something that could be touched, examined, boarded, something that carried not just our signal but our fingerprints. She proposed the First Contact Initiative. It took 11 years for the UNSC to approve funding, another 9 years to design the vessels, 7 more to build them. The Chandrayaan-7 was the last of its line, the culmination of everything humanity had learned from the 6 ships before it. Each of those earlier vessels had improved on the last, better propulsion, better shielding, more sophisticated translation arrays, more nuanced cultural artifact packages. The 6th ship, the Ulysses, had made it 42 light-years before its communications array failed and we lost contact. Whether it was still out there, drifting, we don't know. The Chandrayaan-7 was supposed to go further. It did. Just not in the way anyone planned. Chapter 2, What kind of ship she was. People always ask me what the Chandrayaan-7 looked like, and I always struggle to describe her. She wasn't military. That was the first thing you needed to understand. She had no weapons, not even defensive ones, not even the kind of low-grade point defense systems that cargo haulers use. The UNSC had debated this for years. There were factions that said we were being naive, that we were sending our ambassadors into the dark unarmed. There were others who said the opposite, that showing up with weapons would be the most dangerous thing we could do, that whatever was out there would see them before they saw anything else. The peace faction won. And so the Chandrayaan-7 was a diplomat's ship. She was long and narrow, built for efficiency rather than intimidation, her hull the color of deep ocean water, a deliberate choice, actually, because blue is the color of Earth's biosphere seen from space, and we wanted whatever encountered her to understand from the very first moment that she came from a living world. She was 600 meters long. Her crew of 47 included scientists, linguists, cultural anthropologists, historians, 1 psychologist, 2 physicians, and because someone on the UNSC had insisted on a practical compromise, 12 individuals who were classified as security personnel, but who were really just people trained to not start fights. No guns, I want to be clear about that. No guns, no missiles, no energy weapons, no directed EMP systems. What she did have was the most comprehensive translation AI in human history, a cultural artifact suite worth approximately 3 trillion credits, a broadcast array that could emit signals across 47 different electromagnetic spectrums simultaneously, and a message core, the heart of the ship, which contained the complete accumulated record of human civilization. Everything: literature, music, mathematics, philosophy, history, architecture, language, medicine, agriculture, art. Every human language, every dialect, every piece of music ever recorded, every painting ever digitized, every book ever written, every scientific paper, every recipe, every prayer, every lullaby. If the Chandrayaan-7 was our ambassador, the message core was our biography. We launched in November 2109, on a Tuesday, in cold rain. I remember because I hate rain, always have. I was standing in the transport bay watching the launch ceremony on a monitor, clutching a cup of terrible coffee, and someone next to me, I think it was Dr. Faruk Tashkentov, our quantum physicist, said, "Do you think they'll like us?" And I said, "I think they'll find us interesting." Neither of us had any idea how right or wrong we both were. Chapter 3, 3 years out. For the first 3 years, the mission was exactly what you'd expect. Routine, necessary. Occasionally beautiful, occasionally tedious, occasionally both at the same time. We traveled at roughly 0.3 c, 30% of the speed of light, enabled by the Alcott-Singh drive that humanity had only mastered in the previous decade. It wasn't true FTL. It wasn't the warp drives of old science fiction. It was more like a controlled fall in a very specific direction, with the universe's own geometry doing most of the work. Life on the ship had a rhythm. Mornings, or what we called mornings, since morning is a concept that loses meaning in space, were for system checks and team briefings. Afternoons for individual research. Evenings for communal meals and what our social coordinator called cohesion activities, which basically meant we were required to spend at least 2 hours a day in each other's company without hiding in our quarters. I was working on refining the primary greeting protocol. The challenge with first contact linguistics isn't just translation, it's sequencing. What do you say first? What concepts do you lead with? Do you start with mathematics, which is universal? Do you start with biology? Do you try to establish common ground immediately, or do you present yourself as you are and let them do the interpreting? 73 years of first contact theory, and we still didn't have a definitive answer. I had 17 different opening sequences prepared. I'd run simulations on all of them, stress-tested them against 40 different hypothetical alien cognition models, argued about them for months with Dr. Tashkentov and our chief xenobiologist, Dr. Kioma Ez. I was refining the 18th when the sensors picked up something. Chapter 4, First Signal. It came from the direction of Gliese 667c. Our navigation officer, a quiet Norwegian man named Tor Halvorsen, came over the ship-wide comm with the professional comm of someone announcing a change in lunch menu. All senior staff to the bridge, we have an anomalous signal. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. The bridge of the Chandrayaan 7 was an oval room at the top of the ship, with a curved viewport that looked out into the dark. It was designed to be calming, soft lighting, warm colors, no sharp angles. The designers had understood that the bridge crew would spend years up there, and they'd built it to feel like a living room rather than a cockpit. When I got there, everyone else was already at their stations. Captain Reyes Thornton, a compact, silver-haired woman from Buenos Aires who I'd known for 6 years, and who was possibly the calmest human being I'd ever met, was standing in front of the main display with her arms crossed and an expression I'd never seen on her face before. I think it was awe. The signal was on the main screen. It was structured, deliberately structured, patterns within patterns, a mathematical signature that couldn't have been natural, and it was close. Relatively close, 47 light hours away. Is it responding to our broadcast array? I asked. Tor shook his head slowly. It was already there. We detected it when we crossed into this sector. Whatever it is, it wasn't responding to us. It was already there, and we walked into its range. What kind of signal? Electromagnetic, but layered, multiple frequencies, and they're doing something with the compression pattern that our AI can't fully parse yet. I sat down at my station and pulled up the raw data. And then I started to feel it, that specific electric feeling that I imagine every scientist dreams about their whole career. That feeling of looking at something genuinely new. Something the human eye has never seen before, the human mind has never processed. I pulled up Translation Protocol Delta 3, cross-referenced it with the mathematical baselines, and started building a parsing matrix. It took 11 hours. 11 hours, and then the translation AI gave me the first clean render. What it said was, "This boundary is marked. You are advised to reduce velocity and prepare for standard compliance inspection." Chapter 5. What that meant. I stared at those words for a very long time. Then I called Captain Ray's Thornton over to my station and showed her. She read it again. Then she pulled up a chair, sat down beside me, and said nothing for almost 2 full minutes. Finally she said, "They have borders." "Yes. And we just crossed one. Apparently." She looked at the signal data, then she looked at me. "What does compliance inspection mean?" "I don't know yet. The word I'm rendering as compliance has layers. It could mean examination, assessment, or," I hesitated, "or submission." The root morpheme is ambiguous between those 3 concepts. Captain Ray's Thornton was quiet again. Then she said, "Respond. Use the broadcast array. Keep it simple, mathematical confirmation sequence first, then open with Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was our most basic greeting sequence. Pure mathematics. Numbers, geometric relationships, physical constants, nothing cultural, nothing that could be misread. We sent it. We waited. 18 minutes later, they answered. The answer was different from the first message. More complex, more nuanced. And when I finally finished the translation, which took another 6 hours, it said something that made the entire crew fall silent. It said, "Your mathematical competence is acknowledged. Your vessel is identified as non-compliant with Vardock expansion, Empire frontier regulations. You will hold position. A compliance team will board your vessel within 1 standard period. Failure to comply will result in standard suppression measures." Chapter 6. The boarding. They arrived in what I can only describe as a wedge. 7 ships, each one triangular in profile, moving in tight formation. They were dark, not the painted dark of stealth ships, but a structural dark, like the material of their hulls was actually absorbing light. They were also significantly larger than us. The smallest of the 7 was perhaps twice the length of the Chandrayaan 7. The largest was roughly 4 times. Our sensors were going absolutely wild. I remember the specific smell of the bridge in that moment, recycled air with a faint undertone of ozone, which meant someone had been running the emergency systems. I remember the sound of Kioma's breathing next to me, faster than usual. I remember that Tor had gone very still at navigation, the way people go still when they're genuinely frightened and trying not to show it. Captain Ray's Thornton stood in the center of the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back. I'd seen her in dozens of difficult situations over the years. Equipment failures, crew conflicts, a near collision with an unmapped debris field. She always had this quality of existing in the eye of the storm, present, steady, watching. She said, "We comply with the boarding. No resistance. This is a diplomatic vessel, and we represent Earth. We behave accordingly." Then she turned to me. "I want you at the airlock at ease, with the full translation array active. Whatever comes through that door, I want us talking to it before it has time to make assumptions." I nodded. Went to put on my vest with the embedded comm array. Tried not to notice that my hands were shaking. Chapter 7. What came through the airlock. I want to describe them accurately. I want to do this without embellishment, without the kind of retroactive dramatizing that I know happens when people tell stories like this. So I'll tell you what I actually observed, in the order I observed it. They were tall. The first one through the airlock was approximately 2.4 meters, nearly 8 feet. Bipedal, but the joint configuration was different from ours, their knees bending backward in a way that gave them a distinctive rolling gait. Their skin, or what I could see of it around the edges of their armor, was a deep amber red, scaled in fine overlapping layers, like the surface of a pine cone. Their faces were broad, with a flat central ridge where a nose would be on a human, and large horizontally oriented eyes that were amber gold in color. The armor was impressive. Dark, the same material as their ships, form-fitted, with inlaid patterns in a slightly lighter color that I would later learn indicated unit, rank, and combat record. There were 9 of them. 9 armed soldiers, for a civilian scientific vessel with no weapons. The lead one, whom I later learned was a rank equivalent to what we'd call a major, looked at me with those amber eyes for a long moment. Then it spoke. My translation array was active. It caught the language in real time, but the render was rough, too rough for actual communication. What I got back was fragments. Vessel, occupied, cooperative, confirm, ownership, manifest. I did the only thing I could think to do. I spoke slowly, clearly, in the sequence I'd been refining for 3 years. I started with the mathematical sequences that matched what they'd already received from us, establishing shared linguistic ground. Then I moved to the greeting protocol. The major, I'll call him that for simplicity, watched me with an expression I couldn't read. After about 40 seconds, he said something to the soldiers behind him, and then back to me. The translation came back cleaner this time, as the AI learned the phonemic structure faster. You are fluent adjacent in standard Vardoc. This is noted. Your vessel is under provisional seizure under Frontier Expansion Code 17. You will cooperate with inventory and crew manifest procedures. The primary vessel will be relocated to Vardoc Station 12 for full assessment. I looked at Captain Rayce Thornton, who had appeared silently at my shoulder. She said, quietly but clearly in English, "Tell him we are a diplomatic mission from our home world. Tell him we come in peace and we request to speak with his superiors." I translated this as accurately as I could. The major looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something that the AI rendered as, "Primitive worlds do not have diplomatic status in the Vardoc expansion. Your designation has been logged as non-registered organic civilization, classification pending. You will cooperate with transfer procedures." Captain Rayce Thornton listened to my translation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell him we understand. Tell him we will cooperate, and tell him that our home world will be notified of our status." I translated that too. The major said something brief, dismissive, and then began issuing orders to his soldiers. What he said, what he clearly thought was so obvious it didn't even need addressing, was rendered by the AI as, "Notification to your home world is irrelevant. Your home world has no capacity to respond." Chapter 8: The Transfer. They took the ship. That's the simple way to put it. They sealed the bridge, rerouted navigation control to their own systems, and over the next several hours, during which we were confined to the crew quarters, they flew the Chandrayaan-7 to a location that our internal sensors identified as a large orbital station at roughly the edge of what would later be confirmed as Vardoc expansion territory. The station was enormous. I got one view of it through a corridor porthole before they closed the shutters, a vast structure, almost city-like, hanging against a backdrop of dense stellar activity. There were dozens of ships docked at it, maybe hundreds. We were locked in the crew quarters for most of the journey. They brought us food, which I give them some credit for, because they didn't have to, though the food was essentially compressed protein bars in a format designed for a different biology, and most of us couldn't do much more than nibble the edges. We spent those hours doing 3 things. First, documenting everything. Every observation, every reading from the sensors that were still functional inside the quarters, every impression of the boarding soldiers, every word of translated dialogue. Captain Rayce Thornton was adamant about this. Whatever happened next, she wanted a complete record. "We are historians now," she said. "Whatever happens, make sure this gets transmitted." Second, working on the translation. My translation AI was learning fast, faster than I'd expected, actually. The Vardock language had a logic to it, and once the AI cracked the underlying syntax structure, it started rendering full coherent sentences within about 16 hours. By the time we arrived at the station, I could understand maybe 70% of overheard conversation. Third, and I'll be honest about this, some of us spent those hours being quietly terrified, not in a shameful way, in the completely reasonable human way, where you try to maintain composure and professionalism, and then at some point you find yourself in a corner of the bathroom crying for about 8 minutes before washing your face and going back out. I was in that bathroom 3 times. Chapter 9: The Station. Vardock Station 12, which I would later learn was actually considered a minor frontier processing station, not even particularly impressive by their standards, was larger than any human-built structure in existence. They let us out of the quarters when they docked, under heavy escort. They were efficient about it, not cruel exactly, but completely indifferent to our comfort in the way that someone processing cargo is indifferent to whether the boxes prefer their shelves arranged differently. We were walked through corridors. I tried to observe everything. The architecture was functional, angular, but there was a deliberate aesthetic to it. The inlaid patterns I'd noticed on the armor appeared throughout the station's design, geometric motifs that were both decorative and communicative. The lighting was amber warm, which suited Vardock vision, but made the corridors feel slightly unreal to human eyes. There were other species. That was what stopped me in my tracks, almost walking into the soldier in front of me. I'd expected aliens, we'd obviously encountered the Vardock, but the other species walking those corridors were evidence of something larger, something systemic. There were at least 6 distinct non-Vardock species visible in the first 10 minutes, some bipedal, some not, some clearly comfortable, even casual, others moving in small supervised groups that looked uncomfortably similar to how we were moving. Kioma walked beside me and leaned close. "Look at the ones in the groups," she said quietly. I was already looking. "They're being processed," she said, "just like us." She was right. We were shown to what was technically a comfortable holding suite. More comfortable than the ship quarters had been, honestly, with actual individual sleeping spaces and a common area, and a nutrition station that had been partially recalibrated for human-compatible foods, which impressed me despite everything, and told that we would be assessed within 2 standard periods. That night, or what passed for night, since the station maintained a light cycle, Captain Ray's Thornton gathered us all in the common area. She looked at every face. Then she said, "I need everyone to understand something. We are scientists, doctors, linguists, and historians. We are not soldiers. We are not negotiators. We are explorers who have found something far bigger than we were expecting. And right now, our only job, the only job that matters, is to observe, document, communicate effectively, and stay alive long enough for Earth to know what we found." She paused. "Because Earth will know. I transmitted our situation and coordinates before they took the bridge systems. The signal is on its way home. It will arrive in approximately 4.5 years. She let that land. Which means in 4.5 years, humanity will know exactly where we are and what happened to us. And then, whatever they decide, they'll respond. She looked around the room again. So our job now is to last 4.5 years. Part 2: What Earth Heard. Chapter 10: The Signal Arrives. This part of the story isn't mine to tell firsthand, but the historical record is thorough enough that I can reconstruct it closely, and I've been given access to the personal logs of the people who lived it. The signal from the Chandrayaan 7 arrived at Earth's Deep Space Relay Network on March 3, 2115. It was 3:47 in the morning Geneva time when the first automated flags went up. By 3:55, the night supervisor at UNSC Deep Space Monitoring, a 32-year-old Tunisian woman named Farah Twati, who was on her second coffee and her fourth hour of what was supposed to be a routine shift, was staring at a screen that was telling her something impossible. She cross-referenced 3 times before she touched the emergency alert. By 5:00 a.m., the Secretary General of the UNSC had been woken up. By 7:00, an emergency session of the Security Council was convened. By noon, the full message package had been decrypted, translated, and distributed to the relevant authorities. And by evening, with remarkable efficiency, given the circumstances, a classified response team had been assembled. The message Captain Ray's Thornton had transmitted was comprehensive. She'd included our position data, the complete first contact linguistic package, the recorded dialogue, sensor readings of the Vardock ships and station, and most importantly, her assessment of the situation. Her assessment was characteristically calm and precise. "We have confirmed first contact with an intelligent spacefaring civilization, designated the Vardock Expansion Empire. Initial assessment suggests they are a significant interstellar power with territorial claims in this region of space. They do not recognize Earth as a sovereign entity with diplomatic standing, and have detained this vessel under what they consider standard frontier acquisition protocols. Our crew is physically safe at this time. However, I want to be completely clear about what has happened. Our ship has been confiscated, our crew is being held, and we were dismissed as being from a world with insufficient capacity to respond." To whoever reads this, I don't know what the right response is. I'm a ship captain, not a politician or a general, but I will tell you what I told my crew. Whatever Earth decides, make sure it's a decision that says something true about who we are. We'll be waiting. Chapter 11, What Earth Decided. I'll be honest with you. The 4.5 years that followed were not all heroic deliberation. There were arguments, serious, sometimes vicious arguments. The full record of the debates that took place in the UNSC during those years is publicly available. I'd recommend reading them, because they're genuinely illuminating about what we are as a species. There were those who counseled extreme caution, who said that we had no idea what we were dealing with, that the Vardock Empire was demonstrably more advanced than us, that any confrontational response could result in them deciding humanity was more trouble than it was worth, and then Earth would find out what standard suppression measures meant on a planetary scale. These were reasonable people making a reasonable argument. There were those who counseled a diplomatic response, who said we should send another ship, this time with full diplomatic credentials, requesting formal negotiation for the release of the crew and the Chandrayaan-7. These were also reasonable people. And there were those who said something different. The leader of this faction was a man who I have never actually met, but whose name I know better than almost anyone's. Admiral Chen Wei, retired, 64 years old at the time, former commander of Earth's combined defense fleet during the Titan incident, which is a different story, but it established him as the human being most capable of thinking about conflict on a large scale. He came out of retirement because they asked him to. He sat in front of the Emergency Security Council. I've watched the recording dozens of times, and he said something that I think defines the whole thing. He said, "The Vardock aren't our enemy. I want to be very clear about that. They took our ship because they looked at us and saw something small and manageable. They looked at us the way you look at a stray animal that wandered into your yard. They weren't malicious. They were just wrong." He paused. "The question before us is not whether to fight the Vardock. We are not in a position to fight the Vardock. The question before us is, what message do we send? Because right now, the galaxy has a picture of humanity, specifically, a picture that we are the kind of species that can be seized without consequence. And that picture will define every interaction we have out there, with the Vardock and with everyone else, for the next 1,000 years, unless we correct it. He leaned forward. We don't need to fight them. We need to correct the picture. Chapter 12, Building the Response. What followed was the most concentrated period of accelerated development in human history. And here's the thing that I find most remarkable about it looking back. It wasn't just military development. It was everything. Because Chen Wei had understood something fundamental. The problem wasn't just that they'd taken our ship. The problem was that they'd looked at us and seen something small. And to correct that picture, you needed to show them the full thing. The full thing was complicated. Humanity is complicated. Over the following 4.5 years, the time it would take for any response to reach us, every available resource was redirected. It wasn't done through fear exactly. It was done through something more interesting, a collective decision, debated and contested and finally agreed upon, that if the galaxy was watching, we were going to show them something real. The engineering breakthroughs of those years are well documented elsewhere. I won't detail them technically, because I'm a linguist, not an engineer, and I'd get things wrong. But what I can tell you is what the effort felt like from the perspective of the world that was doing it. It felt like a species waking up. Not to war, that's the wrong word and the wrong idea. To possibility. To the understanding that everything that had been theoretical, first contact, diplomatic interstellar relations, humanity's place in a populated galaxy, was suddenly real, suddenly immediate, suddenly something that required an actual answer. And humans, when they're presented with a real problem that actually matters, do something remarkable. They work. Part 3, What Happened to US on the Station. Chapter 13, The First Assessment. Our assessment happened on the third day. We were escorted politely, with the specific efficient courtesy that I'd come to recognize as the Vardok's version of professional behavior, to what I can only describe as a processing hall. Long, wide, with the ambient amber light and the geometric patterning on every surface. There were other groups being processed in parallel, behind transparent dividers. One group that I was almost certain was humanoid, though shorter and blue-tinged. Another that moved in a way that suggested a very different skeletal structure. The assessor was not a soldier. She and I'm using gendered pronouns based on morphological indicators that later proved broadly accurate, was smaller than the boarding soldiers, more lightly built, and wore a different kind of garment. Not armor. Something more formal, with layered elements that I would later learn indicated administrative rank. She had a device that projected a three-dimensional display, which she consulted while looking at us. Then she spoke. By this point, my translation AI was running at something like 85% fidelity, which is functional if not perfect. She said, "You are the crew of Vessel Contact Initiative 7, registration human origin, currently classification pending. Your civilization designates as Earth. Confirm." Captain Ray's Thornton confirmed. "Your civilization type is classified as pre-integration, planetary, single system, estimated technological capacity, low intermediate, estimated population, 8.7 billion. Your vessel was acquired under Frontier Code 17 as non-registered in active expansion space." She looked up from the display with those amber eyes and said something that came across as almost conversational, as if she was being helpful. "Your world will be registered and cataloged. You may or may not receive outreach from the expansion, depending on assessment of resource utility. Your crew will be held here during the assessment period, and then assigned based on educational potential and skill classification." Captain Ray's Thornton said calmly, "What does assigned mean?" The assessor said, as if explaining something obvious, "You will be placed in roles appropriate to your skill level and your civilization's development stage. This is standard. It is beneficial. Primitive populations benefit significantly from integration exposure." I translated. Captain Ray's Thornton listened. Then she said, "I understand. I'd like to formally register for the record that we do not accept classification under primitive or pre-integration status. Earth is a sovereign world with a functioning government, a complex civilization, and we have transmitted this contact event to our government, which will respond." I translated this. The assessor looked at me for a moment, then back at the display. She said something that the AI rendered with confidence as, "Noted for record, your world's governmental acknowledgement is irrelevant to frontier code process. Response capacity from a single system primitive world is not a variable in standard assessment." She dismissed us efficiently and moved on to the next group. Chapter 14, Learning to Live in the Station. 4.5 years. That's a long time to live in a room, even a comfortable room, as a guest who isn't entirely sure whether guest is the right word. But we adapted. Humans are absurdly good at adapting. The first thing we did was establish a functional daily structure. Captain Ray's Thornton insisted on it. "Routine is sanity," she said, and she was right. Morning reviews, research sessions, communal meals, designated personal time. We treated the holding suite like a research station because, in a sense, that's what it was. The second thing we did was talk to everyone. That was mostly me and Kioma, though several others contributed. The station held dozens of species in various stages of processing, some newly captured like us, some long-term residents who had been, in the Vardok's terms, successfully integrated. The Vardok didn't actually prohibit us from interacting with other species. They didn't seem to consider us a security risk, which I found both frustrating and ultimately useful. We talked to a species I'll call the Myra, four-armed, bioluminescent, from a world about 60 light-years away. They'd been integrated for what they told us was the equivalent of 30 years. They were cautiously friendly, curious about us in the way we were curious about them. One of them, I'll call her Saren. After the phoneme I could closest approximate her actual name, spent hours telling us about the Vardok expansion. It was bigger than we'd imagined. The Vardok had been expanding for approximately 300 of their years, which worked out to roughly 230 Earth years. They'd absorbed or cataloged over 40 species. None had successfully resisted. Not because they were crushingly militaristic. They weren't, exactly. They were more bureaucratic than militaristic. They'd simply optimized expansion so thoroughly that by the time a species realized what was happening, integration was already functionally complete. "Have any tried to resist?" I asked Saren. She pulsed through a color pattern I'd learned meant something between yes, and it didn't go well. 3, she said. Early in the expansion, the Vardok do not celebrate what happened to them. It is considered an administrative failure, not a victory. They prefer compliance to confrontation. Why? Because confrontation is expensive, and the Vardok are very concerned with expense. I sat with that for a while. Then I asked, what happens if something expensive enough appears that it changes the calculation? Saren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have wondered that. In 30 years nothing like that has appeared. She looked at me with her large, multifaceted eyes. You seem very certain something will. I was. Chapter 15, The Message Core. 17 months in, something unexpected happened. The Vardok decided the Chandrian 7 message core was worth examining. They'd clearly identified it as a significant data repository early on. It was the most obvious valuable component of the ship, but they'd left it sealed while their technicians worked on accessing it. Vardok information security protocols apparently required extensive analysis before opening unknown data systems, which struck me as frankly sensible. When they finally opened it, they brought in their academic staff. And then, apparently, the academic staff brought in more academic staff. Within 2 weeks, There were 12 Vardock scholars examining the contents of the message core. I know this because they eventually asked for me to come and assist with the translation. I want to remember how I felt walking into that room. The message core's contents had been projected through a holographic display array, the Vardock's technology easily interfacing with our storage systems once they had access. And so what I walked into was a room full of alien scholars standing in the middle of a projection of human civilization. Beethoven's Ninth was playing, not because anyone had specifically chosen it. It had apparently started cycling through the music archive alphabetically after they opened the file. The Vardock scholars were still. Not studying still, not analyzing still. Actually, genuinely still, in the way living things go still when they encounter something that takes them by surprise. One of them, older, with more complex patterns on his garment indicating senior academic rank, looked at me when I entered. In his careful, precise standard Vardock, he said, "This structure, these mathematical relationships embedded in the sound, your species produced this." "Yes," I said. He was quiet, then, "From what technological base?" "Acoustic instruments, physical, pre-electronic." Another long quiet. "When?" "About 400 years ago," I said, "Earth years." The senior scholar looked at the other scholars. They exchanged a conversation too rapid for my AI to fully catch, but one fragment came through clearly. "Recategorization may be required." Chapter 16, Saren was right. The Vardock are, as I said, bureaucratic rather than militaristic, which means they have very specific classification systems, and those systems are not flexible. Changing a classification is genuinely difficult for them. It requires evidence, review, counterargument. What was in the message core was evidence. I won't pretend this was some great victory. It wasn't, not exactly. We weren't released. The Chandrayaan-7 wasn't returned. But over the following months, something subtle shifted in how we were treated. The academic staff began visiting regularly, asking questions carefully, almost reluctantly, as if asking questions of a primitive species was itself slightly embarrassing for them. But they kept coming back. Music, that surprised me most. The Vardock had music complex, mathematically precise, almost architectural in its structure. But the emotional directness of human music was, apparently, unusual. Most species' music, as far as I could gather, was more formal, more structured, less nakedly feeling. Human music is embarrassingly emotional, honestly. If you listen to it with an alien ear, it's like someone announcing their feelings over a loudspeaker. The Vardock scholars found this baffling and then, gradually, fascinating. The senior scholar, I'll call him Scholar Prime, because his actual name was about 14 syllables long, spent 3 sessions just on blues music. He kept returning to it with a kind of sustained bafflement that eventually tipped into something that looked, on his alien face, a lot like wonder. He said to me once during the 6th month of this, "Your species expresses pain as aesthetic. This is unusual." "Yes," I said. "Most species, when they process pain, do so privately, internally. Your species broadcasts it, decorates it, performs it." "We do," I agreed. He considered this for a long time. "There is strength in that," he said finally, "or madness. I have not yet determined which." "Probably both," I said. He did the amber-eye thing that I'd identified as the Vardock equivalent of a slow, considering nod. Part 4, The Message. Chapter 17, Year 4. We'd been on Vardock Station 12 for 4 years and 3 months when things changed. I'll tell you how I knew something was different before I even knew what it was. The station's behavior changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have been obvious to someone who hadn't spent 4 years memorizing every routine and rhythm of the place, but I had. And so I noticed. The shift changes became less regular. The administrative staff seemed distracted in small, specific ways. Conversations became quieter, shorter. 3 times in 1 week, I saw senior Vardock officers walking quickly through corridors that were usually officer-free. Something was happening. I told Captain Rayce Thornton. She listened, as she always did, completely. "What's your read?" "Something outside the station has their attention. Something unexpected." "Could be anything." "Could be," I agreed, "but the timing is right." She looked at me. We'd both done the same math separately and compared notes months ago. 4.5 years for the signal to reach Earth. Some additional time for Earth to prepare and respond. Whatever response was coming, if one was coming, was approximately due. "We wait," she said. "We watch," I agreed. Chapter 18, The Signal from Home. I was in the main common area with Kioma and Dr. Tashkentov, going over translation notes, when Scholar Prime came to our suite. He never came unannounced. He never came without a scheduled session. He stood at the door with his hands at his sides, a gesture that I'd never seen from a Vardock before, and looked at me with those amber eyes. He said, "Dr. Okonkwo, we have received a signal from the direction of your home system." I sat very, very still. "The signal is significant," he said. "The council has convened. I thought you should know." "What kind of signal?" I asked. He made a gesture I didn't have a translation for. It was small, almost involuntary. Looking back, I think it was the Vardock equivalent of someone running their hand through their hair because they don't know what else to do. "Come to the council viewing chamber," he said. "They want you present for the translation." Chapter 19, The Viewing Chamber. The council viewing chamber was the largest room I'd seen on the station. It wasn't designed for viewing in the sense of entertainment. It was designed for analysis. A vast circular space with tiered seating, the center occupied by a holographic display array much larger than the one in the academic wing. When I entered, the chamber was full. Full of Vardock, senior administrators, military officers, scholars, and people I didn't have classifications for. There were perhaps 200 of them, and the room held a very specific quality of silence. The silence of a very large number of very intelligent people who have encountered something they don't know how to categorize. Captain Rayce Thornton was brought in behind me. She looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. The central display showed the signal. Raw data, enormous and complex. The Vardock's own translation systems were clearly already working on it. Partial renders were visible at the edges of the display, structured but incomplete. They needed me for the rest. The chief administrator, a figure I'd seen from a distance but never interacted with, the highest-ranking Vardock official on the station, spoke to me directly. "Human linguist, your home world has transmitted a response to our acquisition of your vessel. We are extending you the courtesy of providing translation assistance, so that there can be no misunderstanding of the message." I looked at the raw signal data. Then I looked at Captain Rayce Thornton. She said quietly in English, "Be precise. This is the most important translation of your career." I connected my translation array to the station's display system. And I began to work. Chapter 20, What Earth Sent. The signal was layered. 5 distinct transmission bands stacked, each one carrying different components. The first band was a standard mathematical identification sequence, the same one we'd sent to the Vardock originally, establishing linguistic baseline. This was the acknowledgement layer. It said, "We received your message. We know who you are." The second band was navigational data, precise coordinates, vectors. And something else, sensor readings from an area of space that the Vardock display flagged as approximately 18 light hours from the station. The chamber went quiet in a specific way when those readings came up. I heard something, a rapid exchange between two senior military officers that my AI caught in fragments. Confirmed active. Mass displacement of. I kept working. The third band was a diplomatic transmission. Formal. Structured. In every major language Earth had, because whoever designed it wanted it to be understood without translation assistance if possible. I rendered it in standard Vardock for the chamber. To the Vardock expansion empire, and to all entities within range of this transmission. This is a formal communication from the United Earth Space Council, representing 8.7 billion citizens of the sovereign world of Earth and its affiliated settlements. We are aware that our vessel, the UES Chandrayaan-7, and its crew of 47 individuals, were detained under Vardock Frontier Code 17 following an unintentional crossing of your territorial boundary. We acknowledge that our crew had no prior knowledge of your territorial claims, as your expansion boundaries were not previously known to us. We are formally requesting the immediate and unharmed release of our crew and the return of our vessel, along with all data and materials contained therein. This request is made in good faith, as the first and preferred option. We are prepared to engage in full diplomatic dialogue regarding territorial boundaries, non-aggression agreements, and the formal establishment of Earth as a recognized sovereign entity under whatever framework your governance structure uses. We consider this the first sentence of what we hope will be a long conversation. However, and this must be understood clearly, it is a request, not a petition. The distinction is important. We are not asking for mercy. We are presenting a first option. There are others. The chamber was absolutely still. I kept translating. The fourth band was technical data. This is the part I'll never forget reading, not because of what the data said in isolation, but because of what it meant, because I'd spent 4 years on that station, and I knew how the Vardock thought, and I understood exactly how they would read it. The fourth band contained specifications, technical specifications for the ships that were, according to the navigation data, currently sitting 18 light hours away. I will tell you what I understood from those specifications. In the 4.5 years since we'd been captured, Earth had not been sitting still. The Alcott Singh drive that had taken the Chandrayaan-7 out to the edge of known space at 0.3 C. Earth's engineers had spent those 4 years rebuilding it. The new drives weren't 0.3 C. They were 0.7 C, and that was the civilian drive. The specifications for the military vessels and Earth had, during those 4 years, built military vessels showed something different. Not faster. The speed was actually similar, but the power signature was different. The energy output was different. The shielding density was, I did the conversion in my head and something cold moved through me, was approximately 40 times what the Chandrayaan-7 had carried. And the number of vessels. I looked at that number for a moment. Then I kept translating. The fifth band was the one that took the longest to render, because it wasn't in standard Vardock, and it wasn't in mathematics, and it wasn't in technical specification format. The fifth band was humanity. It was the message core. The entire message core duplicated, broadcast at maximum range on a signal band that was clearly designed for maximum propagation. Every piece of music we had, every book, every piece of art, every language, every prayer, every mathematical theorem, every recipe, every lullaby. All of it broadcast freely into the space around Vardock Station 12. Not to threaten, not to intimidate, to introduce. As if Earth was saying, you took our ship. Fine, we're sending you the whole thing. You wanted to know who we are. Here, all of it. Look at what you're dealing with.